Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the second set of allegations published by the Sunday Times today against Reform UK's James McMurdock, who surrendered the party whip a week ago when he found out he was going to be the subject of a journalistic investigation into his potential misuse of COVID bounce-back loans in 2020. And despite protesting his innocence last week, a reported statement from McMurdock since might suggest he thinks he's in a bit of trouble now. And Reform UK reportedly want him to resign. But with one MP facing a potential criminal investigation, another having to fire one of their staff for a violent assault on members of the public, is Farage finally going to have to do more than claim he has the vetting process under control? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, for a good 8 to 9 months now, I've been saying that Reform UK are in a bit of a purple patch, and that they could easily crash and burn later this parliament. There's absolutely nothing to suggest that their momentum will be sustained throughout this parliament. And this is a big reason why not. So for those who haven't been keeping up with Reform UK, their latest major scandal. Last week, the Sunday Times alleged that James McMurdock had accessed 2 COVID loans for his companies. One of the companies had been described as dormant up until that point, and the other as having negligible assets. When he found out that the Sunday Times were about to publish, after they contacted him for comment, he voluntarily surrendered the Reform UK whip in Parliament and prepared for investigations. There are now multiple investigations into his use of the loans. It also prompted a question at PMQs last week to raise the fact that Labour are appointing people, or have appointed people, to go after the billions in COVID fraud that we know happened under the Tories. McMurdock made the issue a little bit more newsworthy. Not that the mainstream media, apart from the Sunday Times, have really run with it. But Sunday Times have some more information published today. This is all seeming a little bit like a much smaller scale version of Partygate. They clearly published enough information to make the story interesting, but deliberately held a few things back for later. Partly this will have been to keep running with the story. It was again on the front page today. Partly also to see how McMurdock would react. With Partygate, for example, Boris Johnson kept blundering into the media traps. They would publish some information, then Johnson would weave a fiction to address the facts as published, then the media would publish some more facts which contradicted what he just said. Boris Johnson ended up completely boxed in because he kept failing to consider that maybe the journalists knew things they hadn't yet published. The situation with McMurdock is not only less serious, but less complicated. He's not the Prime Minister for a start. But nonetheless, the Sunday Times have turned the screw a bit more today. They've pointed out that to be eligible for the loans, the businesses would need to be adversely impacted by COVID, which seems obvious enough. But aside from the particular businesses not appearing to be all that active at the time, they are now reporting that McMurdock himself used one of the 2 companies involved just to receive payments from the bank he worked for, Standard Chartered. The article reports that McMurdock had used this company to accept payments from 2016, right up until 2020, really. But the company still exists even to this day. And he still works for that bank right up until the point he became an MP. So the company looks like one of those tax fiddles that's used so that someone can be employed but look like they're a contractor, not an employee, tax dodge. But if the sole purpose of the company was just to bill his employer for his work rather than be on payroll, and that work continued and the payments continued throughout 2020 as normal, there was absolutely no need for that company to have taken out a COVID loan. So why did he? Well, the articles suggest that from round about this time, it was basically spring of 2020, changes to tax rules meant that the fiddle would no longer work. So instead of paying him through this company, the bank just paid him directly as a payrolled employee. This, of course, would make it look like McMurdock was getting less money through that company at round about the same time COVID was happening. He presumably used that as the basis to argue that, my company's not making as much money, I need a COVID loan. Whereas what the Sunday Times are saying is, he was still getting his money from that bank, but it was through payroll, not through his company. Now, if all this is true, McMurdock has been a very naughty boy indeed, and the investigations are likely to conclude the same. And just to add another bit of spice to the proceedings, right at the start of the article today, contains a response from Mr. McMurdock. See, last week he was saying that the loans had all been worked on with his accountants. He was assured by experts it was all above board, it was all done properly, right? Now, for those who watched my video last week, you may remember he'd posted a tweet which I described as weirdly presented and looking very lawyered. Well, now he seems to be saying something a bit different. In today's article, he's reported as saying that he quit Reform UK, which actually was news to me. I mean, surrendering the whip is one thing. You don't normally leave the whole party when you're under investigation. Usually the party leader takes the whip away from you. In this case, he voluntarily surrendered it. If you're maintaining your innocence, there's no reason to leave the party. But anyway, so it reports that he quit Reform UK after taking what's described as specialist advice, and which McMurdock described as privileged and which he chooses to keep private at this time. Now, specialist advice is obviously financial and legal advice, right? Nothing unusual in that. If you're a multimillionaire like McMurdock is, and you are accused of fraud, of course you're going to get top financial and legal advice to make sure you know your position, right? We see it all the time. What we don't see is innocent people choosing to keep that advice to themselves. They usually want to nip the investigations in the bud and reveal their specialist advice, clearing them completely to kill the story. A bit like Rupert Lowe, someone accused him of falsifying his declarations. So an investigation began basically on Friday. By the end of Friday, it had finished, because in actual fact, Rupert Lowe was completely in the clear. And he went straight to the person investigating and said, look, and they went, oh yeah, you're fine. So that's what you do if you're innocent. Last week, McMurdock claimed specialists had said it was all above board. This week, he's claiming to have had updated specialist advice, but he won't tell us what it is this time. That is more than a little suspicious, isn't it? But he's under investigation by various authorities now. We don't need to do trial by public media representation. He's been investigated, including by the Public Sector Fraud Authority. He's on the radar of the COVID Fraud Commissioner, appointed by Rachel Reeves to recoup money. If the investigation goes badly for McMurdock, and he doesn't seem quite so confident of his chances right now, based on what he's reported to have said, then there will come a point where he will be expected to stand down as an MP. Now, I will point out, unless he's convicted of a crime and gets a custodial sentence, there'll be no way of forcing him to step down if he doesn't want to. But apparently Reform UK have called for him to resign right now, not wait. That is because they'd almost certainly win the by-election if it takes place soon. I mean, if he stepped down now, the by-election will probably be in autumn. McMurdock originally won the seat in a tight contest, which needed a recount, if I remember correctly. But it was a narrow loss to Labour because of the massive dissatisfaction with the Tory government. Labour wouldn't win this seat now. I mean, apart from anything else, it's not really a Labour area, I gather. So Reform UK would walk it, probably the Conservatives being a distant second. And it's entirely possible that this would be the case even in a year's time. In fact, probable. I mean, this is probably a fairly safe Reform UK seat for a while now. However, as I've said before, it is possible that Reform are enjoying a bit of a high point right now. If they wait for the investigations to run their course and McMurdock to not resign until at least he's been found guilty, there's a bigger risk holding the by-election next year. It is possible that once Labour's major legislation is passed, which it's very close to doing now, they may be able to tell a much more positive story going into 2026. The Conservatives may also start to present a more coherent narrative as well. Reform UK are also the most vulnerable party now to scandals. Yes, Farage can deflect blame at the moment about McMurdock because even a decent vetting process may not have turned this up, and Farage blames Tice for the lack of vetting from last year anyway. But another, Sarah Potchin's office, another MP, has had to lose a member of staff because she was beating up people at a pride parade. The staff member in question, man declared, charged with assault and criminal damage, was also a Reform UK councillor. Now, sure, two isolated incidents, not the fault of the Reform UK leadership, much like Labour's Mike Amesbury when he assaulted a constituent. Nobody is suggesting that he did so because Starmer was telling him to connect with the public. But just like the Tories fed us a steady diet of scandals over the past few years, because of the nature of the people the Conservatives were attracting, I would argue Reform UK are now going to feed us a diet of scandals because they are the party attracting that sort of person. And the thing is, like, one or two isolated incidents, as long as the party deals with it properly, there's no fault of the party. But if you start to get a daily diet, or a weekly diet at least, of scandals associated with people that Reform UK has selected to be their candidates, in other words, pass their vetting process, it starts to reflect on the party. Now, perhaps in a year's time, Reform UK will be still riding high. But it is also possible that as the direction of travel from the Labour government looks more positive, the excesses of MAGA look more negative across the pond. And if Reform UK do keep churning out scandals from their own elected representatives, and there will be some coming. I mean, my second video today is about a Reform UK council. It's an absolute beauty. Maybe Farage won't have such an easy time of it next year. At the same time, if McMurdock resigns, he'll be effectively admitting his guilt. I mean, he can try and smudge it by saying, well, he's only resigning to avoid being a distraction for the party, but people will know it's bollocks. If you're innocent, the investigation will clear you. So not sure I see him resigning unless he has to, because it would look very bad for him. But Farage cannot afford to lose a Westminster seat, or he will look like he's going backwards. So I'm not surprised he wants the by-election this year, not next year. I think he probably would win it next year, but it may be less certain. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for easy access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.